Om. 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 Sahana vavatu. Sahanau bhunaktu. Saha viryam karavavahai. Tejasvinavadhitamastu. Ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Sukhamatyantikam yadhyat buddhigrahyamatīndriyam vetti yatra na caivāyam sthitaschalati tattvataha yam labdhva chaparam labham manyate nadhikam tataha yasmin sthito na dukkhena gurunapi vichalyate tam vidhya dukkha sanyogam viyogam yoga sangitam sanishchayena yoktavyaha yogo nirvinna chetasa sankalpa prabhavan kaman tyaktva sarvana sheshataha manah saivendriya gramam viniyamya samantataha shanai shanairuparamit buddhya dhriti grahitaya atma samstham manah kritva na kinchidapi chintayet yato yato nischarati manaschancalamassthiram tatastato niyamyaitat atmanyeva vasham nayet prashantamanasam hyenam yoginam sukhamuttamam upaiti shantarajasam brahmabhutamakalmasham yunjannevam sadatmanam yogi vigatakalmashaha sukhena brahma samsparsham atyantam sukhamashnute sarvabhutasthamatmanam sarvabhutani chatmani ikshate yoga yuktatma sarvatra samadarshanaha yo mam pashyati sarvatra sarvam cha mayi pashyati tasyaham na pranashyami sachame na pranashyati. Hari Om. Namaskaram to everyone. The 23rd verse. Dukkha Sanyoga Viyogam. The severance from the union with pain. Know that as the yoga of severance The reason they use the word severance is because of the union or the association or the bondage we have developed with pain. And there we have said how the power of acclimatization doesn't help us realize, perceive pain as pain, doesn't help us perceive sorrow as sorrow, doesn't help us perceive imperfection as imperfection. So the only way we combat the constant onslaught of acclimatization, the power of acclimatization can be overcome with a constant association with the higher. When we gain higher knowledge, when we allow the wisdom of the masters through surrender, we gain a fresh perspective. We start looking our life, we start looking at our experiences from their perspective. In fact, you should allow others' perspective. In fact, you should allow yourself to look at your life from others' perspective. That's the first thing. For perhaps we become a quality of a student is he allows his life to be perceived by this. Means he encourages, or not, I wouldn't say the word encourages, but he gracefully receives any opinion from others. Isn't that what Lord Ganesha, when he has the large ears, mean? The large ears means what? When you have large ears, means you're very receptive to everybody's view. You are ready to receive any opinion of others. As Shakespeare says, give every man thy ear, but few thy voice. And I say that Jitendra ji is saying one of his young friend. How do I, have you spelled it right? If that's how it is spelled, it's a tongue twister. I don't know how to spell that. Anyway, you're welcome, sir. He's not yet joined. Huh?
No, he would. He said he has got some sound problem. He would join.
What is his name, by the way?
Kshitij. Horizon. The English name is Horizon.
Horizon. Okay.
Horizon. Kshitijamu. Kshitijamu. Sha.
Chap. Okay. All right.
Ksha.
Got it. Got it.
Ksha. Kshitijo. Okay. Right.
Thank you. The severance from our limitation. Severance from our limitation, our ignorance, severance from our own perceptions. There's nothing I mentioned the other day, there's nothing as something called as perfection. Every stance of so-called perfection appears imperfect from a higher point of view, isn't it? So from the standpoint, from the grandstand of a realized soul, everything looks imperfect. So therefore, we must be very uh, Catholic to be able to receive any idea that comes our way without resisting. So the only way we can overcome the power of acclimatization, which expresses as ignorance and resistance. In a layman's term, I'm saying, you resist any change, and you're not aware of the imperfections. So the only way is through higher knowledge, through surrender. You will sever from the union with pain. And he said that should be practiced with determination and an undespairing mind. Anirvanna chetasa. Undespairing. What does undespairing mean? What's the meaning of undespairing? What's the correct meaning of that? Rajima, any idea? What does undespairing mean?
I think not giving up, Guruji. Just keep on going without any despair, without any.
What does despair mean?
A kind of a frustration, a kind of a something which may hold you back.
What is the dictionary meaning? Yes, Hariji.
To despair is to lose hope. So undespairing would be hopeful, to have hope.
Correct. So undespairing means you approach it with great certainty. You have every possible notion that you will get there. So there's no doubting oneself. Okay, so that should be practiced with determination and full of hope. So with that hope, we'll move forward. 24. Sankalpa prabhavan kaman tyaktva sarvan asheshataha manah saivendriya gramam viniyamya samantataha. Sankalpa prabhavan kaman tyaktva sarvan asheshataha manah saivendriya gramam viniyamya samantataha. Sankalpa prabhavan kaman tyaktva sarvan, abandoning without reserve. Asheshataha. Asheshataha means without reserve. Abandoning without reserve all desires born of sankalpa. Sankalpa prabhavan, born of sankalpa, which is nothing but thoughts. Abandoning without reserve all desires born of sankalpa, and completely restraining the group of senses from all quarters by the mind. Manasaivendriya gramam viniyamya samantataha. From all quarters, the group of senses from all quarters, restraining viniyamya. The Sanskrit word for restrain is viniyamya samantataha, from all quarters. And then he says manasa. The crux of the verse is manasa. Manasa means the mind, by the mind. all desires, abandoning all desires without reserve. In fact, every desire must go. That's what he's saying. Without reserve, all desires born of sankalpa, abandon. In fact, all desires other than self-realization must go. So now you know how much challenge you have ahead of you. Any desire other than the desire for self-realization, nothing doing, it must be abandoned. Without reserve, no holding back. Please, for my grandchildren, at least I should have little desire, no? I don't want to become a sannyasi. I will have attachment. I will have this. I will have that. Why are you coming to this knowledge? You live your life, no? You want to come to this knowledge and say, I will choose. No buffet system here. You take everything or don't take at all. No. Whatever suits you, you do. Huh? And arrogance of it. You surrender, you got to complete Sharanagati. Completely surrender. No, not in halves and quarters and bits and pieces. So he says, abandon all desires without reserve. As we know, all these thoughts and desires, the thoughts arise from the ignorance of the self. So the ignorance is the root. From ignorance comes a thought. From the thought comes desire. And when the desires develop a vega, a momentum, you have an attachment to the world. Therefore, he says all of them have to go. A bit too much. This is the qualification, preparation required for meditation. So if you are not able to abandon sankalpa, prabhavan, kaman, that is a signboard you must keep outside all meditation halls. Nobody will enter. Abandon all desires without any reserve. That is what you need to meditate. Don't be angry at me. This is what the Lord is saying. The problem is the current day gurus are not saying this. Nobody is saying it. Don't nod your head. I will not agree. Give up every desire except desire for self-realization. Then only you can meditate. In fact, there's a beautiful saying, a Zen saying. The saying is, arousal of a thought is sickness. Non-continuance is a medicine. It's a Zen saying. It's a beautiful saying. Arousal of a thought is sickness. Non-continuance of a thought is a medicine. So if you don't continue them, it is medicine. So the problem is all of sankalpa. You know, when a student decides to commit suicide, so many cases we see, isn't it? Children committing suicide because they have not fared well in exams, or their love is not accepted, or there is something that has overwhelmed them and they decided to end their life. So they decide to end their life. They want to commit suicide. It is nothing but one negative thought, isn't it? One negative thought is enough. It is not worth living. Finished. It is also another thought. There's nothing worth in this world developing a fascination for. I must seek the self. It is also a thought. It doesn't matter. There's nothing worth in this world for me to hold on and develop an attachment to. So I must renounce it with all reserve. Without any reserve, I must get rid of it and seek the self. That also the thought, sankalpa. But all you must understand is every thought is so powerful if you are able to hold on to that thought. Therefore, they are giving, as we learned, the Shastras only give the thought of the self. So if this thought and the bug for self-realization gets into you, oh my God, then you will have no other attachment. Then you'll have no other worries. But the question is, the thought must get into you. The thought of the higher. The thought of the realization. And then the second half of the verse, he says, completely restraining the group of senses from all quarters by the mind. What do you understand by this? Restraining the group of senses by the mind, he says. What is the intention? What is the purpose of injecting the word by the mind? Manasa. The word manasa is by the mind. See, the reason, the fundamental reason why they have used the word by the mind. Hariji.
Mind also includes intellect.
Dismissed. Exam failed. Wrong answer. I am asking, sir, Upanishad class finished yesterday. Today is Bhagavad Gita. When I talk of the Upanishad, you talk of Gita. When I talk of Gita, you talk of Upanishad language. Please be very clear where you are.
Okay.
The problem is you're everywhere and nowhere.
Yeah.
Huh? Inge, they don't mean the mind and intellect. In fact, when they say the mind, only the mind. So he's saying restraining the senses by the mind. The question is, why is it by the mind? Gayatri Ma, people may restrain physically but indulge mentally. So therefore, to ensure that you don't practice spirituality at the physical level, he tells real control is at the mental level, man, not physical. It is not, many people determine the quantitative and the qualitative contact with the sense objects as either material and sensual, isn't it? A sensualist or a materialist is not measured by the quantum of contact with the sense objects. I can't change your perception. It is not what sense object you contact, what is the state of your mind that determines a state of spiritualist or a materialist. I know you'll not agree. You will still define and determine me by my physical status, physical position. If you find me in the bar drinking, you will all brand me as a sensual fellow, indulgent fellow. You will not know the state of my mind. You will only determine and define me by physical position and status. Am I right? Jama, correct? Tomorrow I go to the club every evening and start drinking. Let's say you find me in the club. That's also a spiritual, high spirits they all are in. I find myself in that spirit. Keneshitam patati preshitam manaha kena prana pratama praiti yuktaha keneshitam vachamimam vadanti chakshushrotram kahudeva. Yesterday we learned Deva. Deva, what is that spirit? So I go to search for answer in that spirit. Both are spirits. They have muted you before you give an answer. They're also afraid what answer they'll give you. Huh?
The statement can never happen, Guruji. I never think that you will be found in a club amongst such company, because you have no desire and such a thought will never arise in your mind. I'm very confident about it.
No, you are more confident than I am. I like that confidence. But let's say, I'm giving an example. Let's say I am in that environment.
It is the mental attitude that matters and not the physical position where you are. You may be with the indulgence, but you may not be indulging mentally. So that is most important.
So it really doesn't matter where one is, isn't it?
Yes.
Stick to that word. Huh?
Yes, Guruji.
It is being recorded also. It's being captured also. So it is not a physical position or status. As long as one can claim to have control, a total control over the mind, I've completely mastered the mind, it doesn't matter. Therefore, he says, to ensure. So when he says abandon all desires, it is not physical, it's mental. So what does it matter if I am physically restraining and mentally indulging? This is what happens to majority of spiritual practitioners. Because of the garb, they are restricted of their physical movements, isn't it? You can't be seen doing certain things. You don't have a license. Tradition so powerfully controls and limits your activities. The moment you go a little beyond that, you're in trouble. A little. Because hundreds and thousands of eyes are constantly on what you're doing. So it is so heavily defined and predetermined by your code and conduct, by what you do, what you wear, what you eat, how you speak, how you do this. So that determines and defines a spiritual person. Agree or not? And yet the truth is that does not. So whoever fits into that, you accept them as spiritual. But one who merely, in fact, I'm just referring to what Swamiji used to tell us, in where he was with Swami Chinmayanji for many years. He was the only one who was a grihastha. Everybody else is a sannyasi, as you know, in Chinmaya mission. So he used to say, those days, he used to put on his shorts and go for a jog in the campus, the Poi ashram. Those of you who have gone there know what I'm talking about, where it is and things. So a lot of complaints used to go against Swamiji to Chinmayanji. Look at this man, he's wearing shorts and shoes and going for a jog. So the dress code determines how spiritual you are. He said only Chinmayanji understood him. Nobody understood him. So he got the license, you go on path. You do what you have to do. So it is not what you wear, it's not what you eat, it's not where you are physically. But that doesn't mean you use it as a justification and say, chalo yaar, now I've got the license from the Shastras, let me do whatever I want, let's do maja. Then you have no objective. Then you can royally be a direct sensualist, no? Why do you have to wear a garb and try and satisfy your sensual and material appetite? Go and royally worship the senses and material world. Is anybody objecting you? Majority of the world are sensual and materialistic. Do you have any objection to that? No, that is what they are. If somebody is running behind in money and wealth and enjoyment, that's what they are. But why does one have to adopt a spiritual garb to satisfy that weakness for senses and materiality is something. In fact, there was this, remember there was this issues, I don't know if it's still prevalent, there are issues about this in the Christian churches. They had this systematic abuse of children. Isn't it? This was not long ago, even to the extent the Pope had to openly accept and seek an apology for the systematic thing. And I remember there was the it was in the media, the term they had used. Harishi, can you just capture these two words? They're called as predator priests. I remember that word sticking in my mind. Now, what do you mean predator priest? Enna meaning of it? What do you understand by that? Forgive me, my language is a little poor. Harishji, what does predator priest mean?
A predator is one who preys. Praise and P-R-E-Y-S.
That.
Whereas their pun on this, so I mean, praise and praise. So one who preys on others in the garb of a priest.
So instead of protecting and giving them comfort and shelter, you're abusing that for your own well-being. That attitude, that hypocrisy is what one needs to be careful and be guarded. So you can, there's a saying that you can be guarded as a prince with soldiers, attended by counselors, and protected by a fort. And yet, if your thoughts disturb you, you will be a miserable man. You could be a king, you could be guarded. You have counselors, you have guards, you have high walls of your palace, but yet you can, you have no, your thoughts are not under control, you are a slave. Therefore, he, not only here, throughout, we have been cautioned that spirituality is measured by your mind, by its mental status. It's not physical. So sense indulgence is determined by the mental state, not your physical position. Therefore, he says, completely restraining the group of senses from all quarters by the mind. So sense control is not denying or depriving yourself of any sense contact. So the extremities people go is either they are completely recklessly indulging in the senses or completely frustrating themselves by punishing themselves of not giving any freedom to the senses. So it is not the two extremities. So it's not giving a license to the senses and letting it run wild, nor is it depriving yourself of the freedom of the senses which they need. So sense control is not denying of any sense contact. But my simple question is, when you lack self-control, what happens? Now, why I am asking this, because he says sense indulgence. If you lead a life of sense indulgence, you are not fit for meditation. Therefore, he says you must control your senses, isn't it? Now, my question is, in the context, he says sense indulgence, it's not conducive for your higher sadhana. Therefore, the question is, when one indulges, what are the consequences? Please think, don't jump into answers. The question is, what are the consequences if one indulges in anything? It could be eating that extra laddu. It could be sleeping, that alarm has rung and yet I know I have to get up. I still linger in the bed. It could be anything that you do over which you have no control. Sense indulgence is when the mind backs an action. I'm giving you the definition. I'm not bothering you with that definition. When the mind alone backs an action, it is called sense indulgence. When the intellect controls that contact, intellect sanctions it and says, go ahead and enjoy it. I think I can afford to have a second helping of the dessert. Intellect has said, go ahead, no problem, everything is fine. It is not sense indulgence. It's not quantitative. If the intellect has approved the contact, it is not indulgence. If the mind has established an indulgence. Now the question is, what are the consequences of any indulgence? What does it do to you? What does sense indulgence do to you? Sitaramji, what happens?
My understanding is that if you indulge in actions which are backed by the mind, then it's a continuous process. You will indulge, then you will ruminate on that, you will indulge more in that. So it's a continuously downward spiraling activity, which will leave you dissatisfied fully.
No, you're talking of the spiral effect. I'm asking the immediate consequence. What's the first thing that you feel whenever there's indulgence?
Oh, the first thing that will happen is that you will be deviated from your focus will be lost from what you were trying to do, and indulge in the activity that is your sense organs are talking of.
That's a nice construction. Your sense organs are talking.
Yeah, I mean, your sense organs have a desire, and your mind is backing that desire, which leads to indulgence. So you will engage in that activity to satisfy that desire.
Yes, you're right. But what are the consequences? What do you experience? Obviously, you said you're distracted. You're not your focus.
Distracted. The moment you indulge, indulge in that desire by actions, you immediately feel satisfied having, like if you have craving for some food, for example, and you eat that food at that particular point in time, your craving is satisfied, but doesn't leave you. That craving will come again after some time. So although you satisfied the desire at that particular point in time, it is not yet over. It will come back again.
No, the desire very much, as rightly said, the desire is very much there. It's very much, it doesn't die. Just a temporary sort of a satisfaction you have. But instantaneously, the moment you give in to the mind and fall a prey to that senses, inwardly speaking, you have committed a sin.
Oh.
The first consequence you will have to deal with, you will have to bear with is, you know, you have lost control. It's not what other person, from other person's perspective, it is just a quantity. Either you're having or not having, either you're contacting or not contacting. But inwardly, you know what prompted it. So when I have lost control over my mind, the feeling I have is a heavy guilt of having committed a sin. And the moment you have that feeling of guilt or having committed a sin, your mind, okay, when your mind is agitated, isn't it? When you feel a guilt, your mind is agitated. It's not its peaceful self. It is unfit for any spiritual practice. Forget the
No.
lofty exercise of meditation.
Now I get what you're saying, Guruji. If the action was or desire was backed by the mind but not by the intellect, and you indulge in that action, automatically you feel the sense of guilt. But if the action was backed by the mind and the intellect, then there's no sense of guilt. That's
See,
where the difference lies.
that's the actual difference. That's what I
Yeah,
build up
that's the
to it,
actual
isn't it?
difference. Yeah.
I mentioned all this. If an action, irrespective of what you do, an action, if it is done by the intellect, sanctioned
That's
by
the
the
difference.
intellect, then there is no guilt, because, but again, your intellect also can be wrong, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's where comes the conscience.
Conscience.
So ultimately, it's the conscience that tells you. But we are only fundamentally saying a life of license given to the mind and any indulgence agitates the mind, creates a guilt unfit for spiritual study. Therefore, you will have to restrain the senses, control the senses, live a life of discipline or control, so that you create an atmosphere where the mind is calm and peaceful. The moment the mind is calm, it is fit for higher spiritual practice. You must make your mind worthy and fit for concentration and meditation. So this is what he's saying. Abandoning without reserve all desires. Ultimately, all these desires have to go, and restrain the group of senses, not at the physical, at the mental level. If you do this, you are fit for meditation. Okay. 25. Shanai Shanairuparame Bodhya Dhriti Grahitaya Atma Samstham Manah Kritva Nakinchidapi Chintaye Shanai Shanairuparame Bodhya Dhriti Grahitaya Atma Samstham Manah Kritva Nakinchidapi Chintaye. Now, this verse onwards begins the next topic, which talks about how meditation reveals the self in one and all. Verses 25 to 32. Now here he says, Kshanai Shanai Ruparame, little by little, let him withdraw buddhya, by the intellect. Dhriti Grahitaya, the intellect has held firm the mind. Little by little, let him control the mind. Having established the mind in the self, Atma Samstham Manah Kritva. Having established the mind in the self, let him not think of anything. Nakinchidapi Chintaye. Look at how beautifully he has said it. If you have lost control over your mind, yes, ma'am. If you have lost control over your mind, you're unfit, unworthy for any spiritual exercise. Therefore, the The essential exercise we all must embark in is to get a firm grip of the mind. And how do you do that? Little by little. In fact, it is not wrong to even say so, that one of the most powerful ways of measuring how much wisdom you have. Each of us have some wisdom, isn't it? Whether it's carried forward or whether you're acquired, both put together. That is your asset. What is your wisdom asset? How do you measure your wisdom asset? Annapurnama. Looks like now you are. America has only got F-15. You got F-62 with you. You got a supersonic.
Namaste, Guruji.
Yes, ma.
We can measure our wisdom maybe by like how much we have control over our senses, by not being in, not being away from the environment, but by being in the conducive environment and exercise total control over the senses.
Correct. It is creating a conducive environment. That's what you mean. Slowly you get a control over the mind by creating an environment. But the real wisdom, how much we have, can actually be measured by
like how much we can focus on the go within, explore within.
you can still stick with the subject. You have actually answered it. The moment I'm probing, you're changing your stance. No, you're right. You already said that. Let me get others. How do you measure your wisdom? And it's important you associate wisdom with that. Sudhakar Garu, how do you measure wisdom, sir?
By practically implementing how much the knowledge what we have got, and how much of that knowledge is converted into the wisdom, and how much of that knowledge is put to practicality. And I'll definitely come to know whether I'm utilizing that knowledge properly or not.
Indeed, that's precisely the question. How do you know your wisdom, whether you are practicing it in day-to-day life? How do you measure it? And you know it, whether you are practicing it or not. So what is that tool which comes to your clear awareness? You know it innately.
I think that comes through our conscience only.
Conscience.
But I don't know the exactly measuring instrument for the wisdom.
There are many tools, but in the context as we talk of it, it just could be looked at that way. I'm only saying the same concept we are learning now, the previous verse and this verse, could be looked at that way.
We have to utilize our intellect.
Indeed. In fact, the powerful way of wisdom is intellect controlling the mind. As simple as that. Whether your mind is under your control, whether intellect controls the mind or not. And to the extent you have control, to that extent you have the wisdom. The rest, everything is disregarded. Everything is inconsequential. How much of Shastras you know, whether you can chant the scriptures, whether you have the language, whether you understand the text. You could be pedantic, you could be very poetic. You have lived with great spiritual men. All that is redundant. End of the day, is your mind under your control? If my mind, to the extent I have controlled my mind, that is measured with the wisdom. So we got to understand that. And it's a powerful means of actually measuring wisdom. Kumar ji has rightly said, intellect control the mind. Shakespeare says beautifully, it is one thing to be tempted, it is yet another thing to fall. It is one thing to be tempted and yet another thing to fall. I will not fall for that temptation. I like it, but I will not fall for it. That's the kind of innate strength you should have. Little by little. Now, why does he say little by little? Because the process is gradual. You cannot try and conquer the mind with force and vengeance. And you can't say, oh, I'm going to pounce on it like a pailwan, no? Kusti fight, you pounce on it, I'm going to conquer it. It's not like you can't conquer the mind like that. You have to slowly, shanai, little by little, you got to withdraw by the intellect. It is a very patient process. It's a slow process. And if you try to do anything abrupt, anything by force, the law kicks in. What's the law? Anything forced is not forceful. So I can't force you to do anything because it is against the law. I can't force you to do anything. Anything forced is not forceful. So you can't force the mind. You got to slowly but surely pull the mind little by little. And to the extent you have no control of the mind, that mind creates havoc. We're talking of control, isn't it? To the extent you have control, it gives you peace and quietude. To the extent you have no control over the mind creates havoc. Now tell me, how does your mind create havoc in you? That lack of control of the mind creates havoc. Now, these are all familiar concepts. There's nothing new that's coming your way. The fact that there's nothing new coming your way, it only means there's that much the wisdom has to say. Therefore, what you need to seek is the wisdom, but not variety in concepts and ideas. Yeah, time should come in your life where the search for this knowledge should come to an end. The search for wisdom should start. You should not say, "Ayo, he's repeating the same thing, the same concept, the same idea, similar thing," because that is what is the truth. I may say many other things, but I'll come back to the same truth. So the question is, to the extent you control the mind creates a certain environment, an aura. But to the extent you do not control your mind, the mind creates havoc. But tell me, how is your mind creating a havoc? Right now, you all are, it's like a disease. The mind is creating issues within you. How is your mind creating issues? Lakshmi Ma says, mind is wandering always. Where is your mind wandering? Even now it's wandering, huh? The mind wanders. Where is your mind wandering? That I can't tell, sir. Where is it wandering? I don't want to know where it's wandering. But your mind wanders. Yes, Ma, I know you're here. The monkey mind. Ushama is saying it's the mind like a monkey. How does your mind create havoc to you? Not steady. I've never heard this kind of description. Mind is like a mad, drunken monkey. Monkey also drinks. Even a pudusa irukku எனக்கு இது. I know where you're getting at. See, the nature of the mind, you got to understand. The nature of the mind is it operates on the powerful raga dvesha, the likes and dislikes. When the world doesn't fit into your like and dislike, you create a tantrum. Correct? You rebel. Just because you like something you don't get, and just because you dislike something you get, you become a rebel. It causes great frustration. You become a rakshasa, isn't it? Ushama is nodding her head. The moment I said rakshasa, she's nodding her head. I want little clarity there. Very sorry, ma. Your camera is very clear.
Namaste, Guruji.
Yes, ma.
You will absolutely have no control on your mind, Guruji. So, and when you're, as you said, when you're raga dvesha, that control you will not have on that, then it runs amok and it always tries to destroy or throw tantrums or cause harm to others to satisfy yourself in some small way. That's how you become a rakshasa.
So the mind has it's either my way or no other way. Somebody said my way or highway. So you hell bent on getting what you want. So the likes and dislikes, you want the world to function, think, and operate in our way. There's a constant you fight at the world, you argue at the world. The world seems to be like a punching bag for you, constantly revolting it, because your mind the world doesn't fit into your mind. Second, your mind constantly rambles, as you all have said. It just goes into the past worries or future anxieties. Past is dead, future is unborn. It's all the time going into these. Third, your mind constantly generates endless desires. Constantly your mind is breeding desires, and wherever there is desires, it only means dissatisfaction, discontentment. Your mind also develops a lot of attachment to whatever you have. And then you have all other possible diseases you can imagine. You will have depression, you will have sleeplessness, you will have hypertension, so on and so forth. They're all possible things. But all this is possible to the extent you don't control the mind. And you know, to the extent you have no control over the mind, to that extent all of this cause you great agitation. Therefore, he says, withdraw it little by little. Little by little withdraw, and having established the mind in the self, let him not think of anything else. Ananya chinta. Once you set your mind on that, there's no other thought, no anya chinta. Now our mind is anya chinta, all the time thinking, because we have no control. So the whole thing boils down to the intellect, the buddhi. Buddhya dhriti grihitaya. I don't know how else to say. The truth is so simple and straightforward. Now the question is, how do you develop your intellect? If it is the intellect that has to control the mind, the question is, how do you develop your intellect? Vasantama?
You have to do a more of reflection and contemplation to enrich your intellect.
And what are you doing in reflection? While you're reflecting, what are you doing?
Your mind is on the higher, and the knowledge you have gained.
I'm not talking where the mind is. You're saying through reflection and contemplation, you develop the intellect, rightfully so. But when you're reflecting, what are you doing with the intellect?
You're giving it a direction. Controlling the intellect.
Controlling the intellect. Yes, sir. Chapan, sir. Hariam, sir. Hariam, Chapan, sir.
By improving spiritual quotient, we improve this.
How do you, the intellect, how do you develop your
improving spiritual quotient leads to strengthening of intellect. And once we get, we seek knowledge, and in knowledge we reflect, contemplate on the inputs and compare, do Atma Vichara, we do. How we are leading life and what is that knowledge. We convert knowledge to wisdom. When we convert to wisdom, our intellect gets strengthened.
So you seem to have completed the cycle, huh? So, but in the cycle, in the chain, there's a missing link. All I'm asking you is, when Vasantam also rightly said, you do study and reflection on the knowledge. When do you do?
Early morning in the
Brahma Muhurtam. And what is Brahma Muhurtam timing, Rajima?
4 to 6.
1.5 hours between 4 and 6.
4 to 6.
So between 4 and 6, what do you do?
Manana.
Where do you do manana? 1 minute, let me ask Rajima. Rajima, where do you do manana, ma? In deep sleep, huh? Huh?
In your study, Guruji.
Where study? I'm doing thinking, you might say, no. You may say, I'm doing manana while I'm cycling also, you may say, no. Mudiyada, is it possible? I must appeal
You have
to
to
you
be.
all.
You have to be seated in the.
You have. Do not consider any other activity other than that reflection till 6 a.m. Nothing else matters. Sun may come, heat may come, rain may come. I am not available for any physical activity before 6 a.m. You all don't understand the value of Brahma Muhurtam. That 1.5 hours in 24 hours you have no value for. Your spiritual transformation only happens between 4:30 and 6 a.m. That's all. Not beyond that. You cannot develop your intellect beyond 6 a.m. I'm challenging you all. Not presenting this wisdom to you all. Challenging you all. Prove me wrong if you can. Beyond 6 a.m., your intellect cannot be developed. So the intellect is only exercised between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. It is your arrogance if you don't take it, if you don't bend down, put aside your priorities in life, get to the text and study, and it's just arrogance. I know what I'm doing. I know my life. I know what is important. I'm not nothing personal to anyone here. I'm saying it with so much of love to you all. Your spiritual transformation is only between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. And spiritual transformation, as Sethuji said, spiritual, what's the term he used? Spiritual quotient is measured with wisdom. Wisdom is intellect, and his intellect is only gained between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. And the question is, what do you do 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. with your intellect? You got to question the knowledge. The first thing you got to do while you're studying and reflecting is question it. The exercise for the intellect is to question. Prashnena. How this, how that, what does he mean by this? How is relevant to my life? What is the context? What is the rationale? The process of the intellect is, it's a rational, Rajima, the job of the intellect is to question, isn't it? Yes or no?
Yes, Guruji.
So the job of the intellect question. So when you have to rationalize every aspect of this philosophy so that it makes a rational appeal to you. And until it satisfies your intellectual, to the intellectual satisfaction, you will question it. And not just intellectual satisfaction, it has to have a relevance to your life. For example, in the previous verse, he said you must control, restrain the senses by the mind. Now, why does it say by the mind? Question it. Okay, because it is not a physical practice but a mental state. Fair enough. Then how does sense indulgence become a deterrent to my spiritual practice? You see this? You're questioning. So if you go through, if you step apart and listen to the recordings, the entire teaching is only through a series of questions. All the while, I'm only questioning you, or questions are raised and answers are given. So all the time we're trying to question and make sense of what this is going on. Why is it said? What is it said? What does it mean in the context? How it should be understood? How it should be applied? And if this is now it's being done, now who is doing it? Rajima, who's doing it?
You're doing it, Guruji.
Abba, that much clarity is there. Now I am doing it. 4 to 6, you must do it yourself. Isn't it?
Absolutely, Guruji.
This process, when it's done, and what does it result in?
Wisdom.
Your intellect becomes stronger. That results in a better control over your mind. And once your mind is under control, it can be planted, it can be established in the self. Now, even if you want to, your mind doesn't obey because your mind is stronger than the intellect. Therefore, you're not able to. So, Shanai Ruparamed. So this refers to that study and reflection, the early hours of questioning and strengthening your intellect and withdrawing your mind wherever you find a necessity from. I need to withdraw. I'm getting too carried away emotionally there. I'm too carried away, preoccupied too much here. You've got to withdraw your mind. So it's an awareness you develop. And once you do that, once you have developed that awareness, then the mind doesn't think of anything else. Let him not wander away and waste the mental resources of thoughts on anything else. Too much of time and energy is wasted in thinking everything other than the self. So he says, let him withdraw. So it boils down to the intellect. Intellect is developed through. So Vasantama, when I said, what do you do in study and reflection? You are questioning the knowledge. Putting your respect and devotion to the knowledge of the Guru, you've got to examine the knowledge. Self-examination is this. You question it. How does it make rational sense to you? So you will accept it until it satisfies your intellect. Till then, you put it aside for further clarification, but you will not accept it on devotion. The moment you accept it on devotion, it is not wisdom. I don't know, is there a word when you accept something on devotion? Hariji, when you accept something on devotion, what does it become?
One way could be blind faith.
It is blind faith. You're blindly accepting it, following it because somebody said so, or because the Upanishad says so, because the Guru says so, oh, Swamiji thinks so. So what? It doesn't matter. Does it appeal to my intellect? That's all matters. That's all should matter. And until it appeals to you, you will keep probing. That's what he means. Kshanai, Kshanai, Ruparame. Let him slowly strengthen his intellect and withdraw his mind from the external world. It has to be gradual, not abrupt. Okay. And also you may want to jot down the example of the charioteer. The charioteer is Krishna, the intellect. The reins is the mind, desires. The horses are the senses. So how well has the charioteer held the mind so that the senses are driven into its respective channels? If the charioteer has no control over the reins, the mind, which is, so the senses, which are the horses, they are helter-skelter, they are running in different directions, you have no control. That just gives an understanding of the concept. Okay. Let's chant 26 and we'll come back to it, but let's get on with it. Yato nischarati manaschanchalamasthiram tatastato niyam yaitat atmanyeva vasham nayet tat yato nischarati manaschanchalamasthiram tatastato niyam yaitat Atmanyeva vasham nayet. By whatever cause the restless and the unsteady mind wanders away, restraining it from that, let him bring it under the control of the self alone. Tata, from that, niyamya, having restrained, Atmani eva, Atmanyeva, in the self alone, Vasham nayet, let him bring it under the control of the self alone. In fact, there are a few tips that could actually help you how you can control the mind. I can't get into it. I will come back and get into the various ways how you can actually deal to control the mind. But whatever be the cause, the unsteady and the restless mind wanders away. Whatever be the reason, restraining it from that, let him bring under the control of the self alone. So what you must only, the whole spiritual transformation just boils down to mind control. Rest of it, I request you to disregard it. They are all unnecessary paraphernalia. Everything else is conducive. The actual thing is controlling the mind. And if this you can get it, everything else becomes redundant. So We'll come back to, as I've said, there are 5 tips. It's not specified in the verse, but there are 5 points I'll come back to, and I'll explain how these few measures could help to control the ever unsteady and the restless mind. This is ever unsteady, sadly so. And as you know, the mind is unsteady and restless because of the desires. The more desires you have, the more restless it is. The more introverted you are, the more calm and composed it is. Okay, we'll come back to it. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.